There are silences that cannot be measured in minutes or hours, but in an entire lifetime. In small towns across America, if you ever pass through on an autumn afternoon, you might see a familiar image. An old mother sitting quietly by the window, her faded eyes staring out onto the street. She is not waiting for a package from the post office, not waiting for the mail truck. She is waiting for something that has long since become hopeless. News from her son, who went to war and never returned. That day, when her son shouldered his duffel bag and left, she saw him off at the train station. He was barely in his 20s. Sunburnt face, blue eyes as clear as a June sky. He turned back, grasped her hand tightly. "Mom, I'll come back. This winter I'll be home again, eating turkey with you." She smiled, nodded, but her throat tightened. Every mother knew. The promise of return made by young men in American uniforms when they boarded a plane bound for a faraway battlefield was as fragile as a thread. At first, letters still arrived regularly. The very first one, scrawled in haste, the ink smudged with sweat, said, "Mom, it's so hot here. Dust everywhere. But I'm fine. I miss your apple pie. When I'm back, please bake one for me." She read that letter until the edges tore. Each word carried the scent of ink, of sweat, of love and hope. She kept it in a small wooden box set neatly beside her husband's altar. He had been a World War II soldier who returned alive, but carried wounds that never healed. Then the letters grew fewer. A week, 2, then a month. Every morning she would open the mailbox by the yard, her hand trembling, hoping to see an envelope stamped from across the ocean. But the box was empty, holding only the sound of autumn winds tossing dry leaves. One cold morning, instead of a letter, 2 soldiers appeared. They stood in crisp uniforms, their faces solemn. One held a neatly folded American flag, the other a sealed envelope. In that instant, she knew. The silence was no longer temporary. It was forever. She collapsed, clutching the flag, her cries, "Photograph or a folded flag." One young widow once wrote in her diary, "He left me with an empty house. Each night I still lay out 2 pillows, one for me, one for him. But that second pillow will never again hold his warmth." I was 26 years old, but my heart grew old that day. Words like these now rest in museums and in the Library of Congress, silent witnesses of a generation of women who gave their youth to war, even though they never carried a rifle. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., standing before the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, a black wall engraved with the names of over 58,000 American soldiers killed in Vietnam, you will see flowers, letters, and trembling hands pressed against the names. Many of those hands belong to mothers and widows. They whisper as if speaking to the departed. "Honey, our son is grown now. He looks just like you." Or, "Son, I'm old now. Soon I'll see you again." Behind every name carved into that wall lies an empty house, a missing seat at the dinner table, a dream cut short. War does not only claim the lives of soldiers, it leaves behind unfillable voids in the hearts of those who remain. People often say a soldier dies twice, once on the battlefield and again when his name is forgotten. But for American wives and mothers, the death of a husband or son is their own private death. A death that lingers on, day after day, in the silence without answers. From World War II through the Vietnam War, the mailbox outside every home did not just carry newspapers and bills. It carried hope. Mothers, wives, young fiancés lived each day waiting, as though their whole world had shrunk down to a pale yellow envelope stamped from a distant land. These were the letters from the front. Soldiers wrote them in smoky nights, by oil lamps in the barracks, or right after battles. Sometimes the ink blurred with sweat. Sometimes the letter remained unfinished when an alarm sounded, and the soldier shoved the paper into his pocket before rushing back to duty. But however brief, each letter was the only bridge connecting war and hunger. Heavy to write, fear, death lurking nearby. Every soldier knew this letter could be his last. At home, the letters became treasures. Mothers tucked them into old wooden boxes as if preserving their children's very flesh and blood. Wives pressed them into Bibles or wrapped them in scented handkerchiefs, holding on to the warmth of their husbands. Some carried them everywhere. One widow said, "I keep my husband's last letter in my purse. I take it wherever I go. He wrote, 'When I come back, we'll start over.' But he never came back. And I never started over." Day after day, the mailbox opened to emptiness. The mother's hands trembled as she lifted the lid, then fell limply as she turned back inside. Neighbors bowed their heads, saying nothing. They knew such grief needed no words. Letters grew fewer. That was the cruel rhythm of war. From 2 a week, to 1 a month, to silence. Silence, as if the world beyond the horizon had vanished. And then one morning, instead of a letter, 2 uniformed soldiers stood at the door. One with a folded flag, the other with a sealed envelope bearing the dreaded line, "The United States Army regrets to inform you." In that moment, every wife and mother understood. The last bridge to their loved one had collapsed. Yet the letters remain, eternal witnesses. In American war museums, you can read hundreds of them. A 19-year-old writing to his mother, "Don't worry, I'll be back." A husband writing to his wife, "I dreamed we were sitting together on the porch." A father writing to his little girl, "Sweetheart, remember to help Mommy sweep the yard. Daddy's coming home soon." Promises that never came true. One Gold Star mother whose son died in Vietnam said, "I have 14 of his letters. I don't read them too often for fear the paper will wear out, but when I miss him, I take one out, read it through tears, then fold it quickly, as if afraid of losing him all over again." Those fragile sheets of paper became heavy stones pressing down on millions of American women's hearts. They carried not just ink, but presence, lit only by a dim lamp. A wife pressed against a cold pillow, touching the hollow left behind. Some nights she jumped up, convinced she heard his footsteps on the porch, his key in the lock, but it was only the echo of longing. These young wives lost not only their husbands, but the futures they had imagined. Children, a small home, trips together, all shattered by gunfire in a country they sometimes couldn't even find on a map. One widow wrote in her diary, "The day he left, I was 22. He promised to return, promised to take me to New York to see the fireworks at Times Square. Instead, the army handed me a folded flag. That year I aged 20 years. During the Vietnam War, thousands of American women lived this way. In suburban neighborhoods, young wives sat silently on porches, eyes vacant. They tried to appear strong, to keep working, to smile at neighbors. But inside there was darkness no one could reach. The pain deepened each night as the news reported, "Today another 200 American soldiers killed." The short lines on TV and in print made their hearts seize. Each number was not just statistics, it could be their loved one's name. One wife remembered, Each time the list was read, I shook like I would collapse. I prayed my husband's name would not appear, then felt ashamed, because my prayer meant another woman would lose hers. War turned us into unwillingly selfish people. Many never remarried, living their entire lives in memory. Some wore their wedding rings into old age, as though their husbands had only gone away on a long trip and could return any day. In American military cemeteries, you can see elderly women seated before white gravestones, setting down a cup of coffee, a cigarette, or a rose. They were the young wives once. Now old, their love and grief remain unchanged. At a memorial service, one woman said, "They say time heals, but 50 years have passed and this wound has never healed. I only learned how to live with it." The pain of America's young behind that red, white and blue cloth were blood, tears, and names that would never again be called at the family table. As early as the 1920s, Gold Star mothers began forming community organizations. They sought each other out, held one another, cried together, and comforted one another at memorials. No one could understand the pain of losing a son more deeply than those who had also buried theirs. One Gold Star mother once said in an interview, "When you lose a husband, you are a widow. When you lose parents, you are an orphan. But when you lose a child, there isn't even a word for that." No language can capture such emptiness. Imagine an American mother who raised her son, watched his first steps, his first day of school, his first football game. She sent him off to war with pride in her eyes, though her hands trembled with fear. And then, one morning, instead of a letter from her son, she received a folded flag. In that instant, she became a Gold Star mother, and her heart forever bore the shape of a gold star. In Washington, D.C., every September, America observes Gold Star Mother's Day. Hundreds of women with silver hair, dressed in black, hold photographs of their sons beneath the waving American flag. They do not shout. They do not wail. They stand in silence, eyes wet with tears. But that silence resounds louder than any voice. Many Gold Star mothers turned their grief into strength. They visited hospitals, cared for wounded veterans, men who returned with missing legs or haunted souls. They believed that if their sons had lived, they too would have wanted their mothers to help their brothers in arms. One story Americans never forget. In 1930, hundreds of Gold Star mothers crossed the Atlantic to France, to the cemeteries where American soldiers from World War I lay buried. Though elderly and frail, they made the journey just to touch their sons' graves. People remembered how, upon seeing row after row of white crosses, many mothers fell to their knees, laid trembling hands on the cold stone and whispered, "I am here now, my son. I promised I would find you, and I have." Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Century after century brought new Gold Star mothers. The pain repeated, as if a wound etched into of Americans know. The freedom they live in today was purchased with the tears of Gold Star mothers. Among all the wars America has fought, none left wounds as deep as the Vietnam War. More than 58,000 American soldiers died. That number is not just cold statistics. Behind each name engraved on the memorial wall in Washington, D.C., lies a broken love story. A family without its pillar. A mother with empty arms. It is said that throughout the 1960s and 1970s, in towns across America, you could see quiet gold stars hanging in windows, the sign of a family that had lost a son in a distant war. Some mothers aged overnight. The day the telegram arrived, they collapsed, clutching the folded flag in their hands. From that day on, their hair turned white. People called them Gold Star mothers. But the gold star was really a scar carved deep into the soul. The grief was not only for mothers, but also for young wives. A widow in California once shared, "My husband left for Vietnam in 1967. He wrote me letters every week. His last one said, 'Sweetheart, when I return, we'll buy a little house with a white fence.' But he never came back. I was 23 years old, a widow, and the house with the white fence only lives in my dreams." In many American homes, you could hear women weeping at night. Young wives cradled their infants, staring out long roads in silence. They no longer hoped for letters. They only feared the knock on the door from 2 uniformed soldiers bringing the news no one wanted. A mother in Ohio remembered, "At the funeral, I placed my son's photograph on the flag-draped casket. They fired the farewell shots. Everyone stood in solemn silence. But I wanted to scream, 'Why my son?' But no one answered, only silence." The Vietnam War did more than take lives. It divided America itself. Protesters filled the streets with signs reading, "Bring our boys home." But when the boys came home in flag-draped coffins, it was too late. Today, if you stand before the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, you see the long black granite wall with more than 58,000 names. Visitors place their hands on that boy. That is the true tragedy of war. American women lost their husbands, their sons, and a part of their own souls. Many believed that after Vietnam, America had learned its lesson. But only decades later, American troops once again left home, this time for the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And once again, American wives and mothers lived through years of anxious waiting, and many faced losses beyond repair. Unlike earlier wars, modern technology allowed soldiers to send emails and video calls. Wives and mothers saw their sons smiling on screens, saw husbands waving from bases in Kabul or Fallujah. But that only made the pain sharper when the calls suddenly stopped. One day with no email. 2 days with no message. And then, instead of a FaceTime call, came the knock on the door from officers carrying the news. A young wife recalled, "My husband called every Sunday night. He said the heat in Iraq was worse than anywhere he'd known. But when he heard our little girl shout, 'Daddy,' he would laugh." The next week, I waited, but no call came. The following morning, 2 soldiers knocked. I knew instantly, and I collapsed right at the door. Older American mothers, who had once lived through Vietnam, now watch sons and even grandsons go off to new wars. Some lost both generations. One elderly woman in Indiana said through tears, "I lost my husband in Vietnam. Now I've lost my son in Afghanistan. I gave this country everything I had, and I have nothing left." In national cemeteries, new gravestones rose beside those from earlier wars. Birth dates just 2 decades before, death dates. Young widows knelt at graves, one hand placing a rose, the other stroking the cold stone. Their children, too young to understand, asked, "Mummy, why isn't Daddy coming home?" And the mothers could only hold them close, unable to answer. Modern military funerals carried the same familiar image, the flag-draped casket, the rifles firing farewell shots, the mournful bugle playing taps, a young wife receiving the folded flag, clutching it to her chest, tears streaming. The picture was no different than in Vietnam, only now, under the war does not end when the gunfire stops, nor does it end when soldiers come home. For the women who lost their husbands, sons, or brothers, war lasts a lifetime. Some young wives became widows in their 20s that lived 60 more years with an emptiness nothing could ever fill. People often say that time heals all wounds, but for them, time only etched the memory deeper. One woman in Pennsylvania once shared at a Gold Star Wives gathering, "I was 24 when I lost my husband. Everyone told me I was young, that I'd have a chance to rebuild. But my heart closed that very moment. Now I'm 80, and I still wear my wedding ring. I can't take it off. Just as I can't take off my memories. As for the mothers, from the day they received the folded flag, they entered old age with weary eyes. Some lived into their 90s, but went to the cemetery every single day, sitting for hours by their sons' graves, whispering everyday stories. It's cold today. The apples are ripe. The neighbor came by. For them, these conversations were the only way to keep their children close. In small towns, many homes still preserve the rooms of sons who never came back. The photograph on the desk, the shirt hanging behind the door, the boots neatly under the bed, all remain untouched, as though he might walk in at any moment. In reality, it is a museum of memory where time has stopped forever. One haunting story. In Iowa, an elderly mother kept a mailbox full of her son's letters from Vietnam. After his death, she never let anyone touch them. When she passed away, the family opened it and found every letter neatly arranged, with pressed leaves and strands of her silver hair inside, as if she had sent pieces of herself to stay with him. These women carried not only their private pain, but the collective memory of a generation. They passed through youth in tears, raised children alone, lived in houses too empty. Even with grey hair and trembling hands, they could not escape the shadows of war. For many, memory became identity. They formed groups, Gold Star mothers, Gold Star wives, to share, to listen, to make sure no one carried the burden of or a wife who grieves. There are also the children, those too young to remember, yet destined to grow up in the shadow of absence. They are called Gold Star children. They grow up hearing, "Your father died for his country." But for a child, that explanation cannot fill the emptiness. To them, a father is not only a soldier. He is the hand that holds theirs when crossing the street, the laughter during a game of tag, the warm embrace before bed. One boy once wrote in a school essay, "My classmates' dads came to see them perform at school. I had only an empty chair, with a folded flag on it. People say my dad was a hero, but I just wish he were here to take me fishing." These children grew up without, but also with pride. Many followed their father's path, enlisting as if to continue the life cut short. One son, who became a Navy sailor, said at a memorial, "My father died in Vietnam when I was less than a year old. I joined the service to finish the journey he never could." This next generation carried fragments of the past. Even without holding a rifle, they were shaped by war. Many daughters of fallen soldiers said they grew up with the quiet strength of widowed mothers and the compassion of grandmothers who were Gold Star mothers. Some families bore the loss across 3 generations: a grandfather in World War II, a son in Vietnam, a grandson in Iraq. For the remaining children, war was not just in history books. It was the empty seat at dinner, the chair no one would ever occupy. At Arlington, you can often see children in tiny uniforms standing by their fathers' graves. Some plant small flags. Others lay toys their fathers once promised to play with. These innocent gestures leave witnesses silent, reminders that war steals not only lives, but childhoods. A woman in her 40s, daughter of a soldier killed in Vietnam, said in an interview, "I have no clear memory of my father. My whole life has been built on fragments my mother shared. His smile, the songs he liked to hum. I carry those pieces in my heart, and I pass them to my children. In that way, my father still lives." War left children to grow up in loss, but also gave them a mission to remember, to retell, to preserve emptiness carried by children who grew up without fathers. America has endured generations of wars: World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. And with each war came more folded flags pressed into trembling arms, more gold-starred banners hanging in windows, more family tables missing their men. Yet from this pain came a kind of light. Gold Star mothers, wives, and children refused to let sorrow become hatred. They turned grief into memory, memory into reminders, and reminders into strength, to care for veterans, to comfort other families, to teach younger generations that freedom is never free. One Gold Star mother said on Memorial Day, "We cannot bring my son back, but we can live in a way that honors his sacrifice. That is the only way I can keep breathing each day." Peace, for them, is not an abstract idea. It is a desperate longing. Peace means a mother does not have to send her son away only to receive a flag. Peace means a young bride does not have to weep in a gown still fresh with promise. Peace means a child does not have to learn to say daddy to a photograph on the mantel. And perhaps that is the greatest message for all of us today. Whether you are 60, 70, or 80, when you hear these stories, you realize how precious life truly is. That every moment with loved ones deserves to be cherished. That a hug, a phone call, an "I love you" might be the last one, and if we miss it, regret will last a lifetime. If you have a family member, a friend, a neighbor who once wore the uniform, call them today. Say thank you. Let them know their presence is a gift, for behind every flag-draped grave, there are millions still quietly carrying the weight of grief. And for those who have already lost, mothers, wives, children, we can never erase their wounds, but we can do one thing: remember them, speak their names, and live with gratitude. War takes lives, but love and memory cannot be stolen. The fallen live on, in the letters that remain, in the smiles retold by mothers, in the photographs kept on tables. They live in the hearts of the next generation. In that way,